What is up, RotoGrinders? We got another edition of FanDuel Friday, talking some NBA. My name is TJ Zwarych. I will be your host, and I am joined by the Luuch, Justin Carlucci. How you doing, my friend?
Good. Early in the day, huge monster slate. Friday, December 23rd. There's a ton of news we're going to be waiting on, but this is just to kind of jumpstart everybody. Of course, you have Grinders Live and Crunch Time, which you're hosting tonight. So you get the beginning of the journey with your NBA experience with us, and then you can finish it on Crunch Time with you, TJ.
Exactly. And so because I'm going to be on Crunch Time, subbing in for Roth today, going to be there with Meansy as well as Dre. Got a solid crew, and we're still waiting on a lot of late news. So we're not going to go too much game by game for the FanDuel Friday show. We're going to talk strategy. We're going to talk big picture stuff. And then we'll be able to answer QQs and handle the late breaking news tonight on Crunch Time. So make sure you're tuned into that. Make sure if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you're hitting the like button for us. And Luuch, let's get into it. You talked about how there's something you love about these big slates. We're looking up top right now with the all the studs we got, expensive players, but there is not a lot of ownership on them right now. Who are some of these studs that you are looking to that nobody else is really getting to today?
Take your pick. They all have, 70-point upside pretty much. It's kind of crazy. I mean, LeBron's coming in at pushing 20% projected ownership. He has one of the best matchups with Charlotte here. I know Luka is ultra expensive, but how do you not love that matchup with Houston? If that game somehow stays a little bit competitive, how do you not try to force yourself to go a little stars and scrubbish on a slate like tonight? Giannis always terrorizes Brooklyn. His player prop points line is sitting at 32.5. So imagine the damage and the ceiling he has when you add in some peripherals and maybe some blocks and steals. He always likes to show off against a guy like Kevin Durant. So I'm looking at those two guys. I think they're extremely interesting. And, one more guy who has killer upside, Joel Embiid. Zubac is just it's a total mismatch for Zubac. I know it's a pretty slow-paced game for the Clippers, but that kind of fits the bill for Joel Embiid. He doesn't need pace to do damage. So I really like those three guys. I know it's not earth-shattering analysis here, but, I think Luka against Houston, if we're talking best matchups for pace for ball handlers on paper, it's probably Houston this year, TJ, arguably, would you say?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I love all of those picks that you had. If I'm running a lot of lineups today, they're all players that I want to probably get not just 2x the field on, but because they're coming in sub 5%, like I'd want to probably get 5x the field on some of these guys. Don't disagree with any of the ones that you said. I think it's interesting that, like, despite both of us liking Giannis and Luka so much, we got Jokic up there and Embiid as well. We got Jokic up there who's a better RG value than all three of those guys, and he's been on a little bit of a tear lately as well. So another player that we'd probably want to include, especially if Jamal Murray is out. He's currently questionable in this one, but some of the other low-owned studs I want to throw in there from a tournament perspective that I really like tonight: Pascal Siakam, Trae Young, and SGA. We're going to be wanting to play a lot of New Orleans players today, and so having SGA as a run back, I think, is a very interesting tournament option as well. Trae Young at 9.7 is just too cheap. Also, we did just recently, as we were coming on, get CJ McCollum downgraded to questionable. So on top of Ingram already out and Zion already out, that could open up a ton of value over there. We still have Porzingis questionable, Halliburton questionable, Rozier questionable. And so while I was looking at Gobert still questionable, I was looking at favoring Chris Paul, CJ McCollum, and LaMelo Ball as my top mid-range spends tonight. That's kind of the realm I was looking to go on top of LeBron James for my single entry. However, it may be kind of difficult to lock those guys in now that we got CJ McCollum downgraded to questionable and Terry Rozier's questionable as well. So if he plays, it makes LaMelo look a little less interesting. But I want to start, because we're not going to get this news for the early stuff yet during the show anyways, and we're going to be getting it during crunch time. I want to actually shoot to the back end of the slate. start at the late night hammer and kind of go backwards a little bit here. LA and Charlotte. It's a 3-point spread. LeBron James is probably the best projected spend up on the slate. Thomas Bryant has a absolutely elite matchup. And without Anthony Davis, these other guys, if you're playing lots of lineups like Russell Westbrook, Lonnie Walker, and Dennis Schroeder, I think are kind of all in play as well, with Bryant just being a phenomenal tournament play on this slate. And then on the Charlotte side of things, we still have Terry Rozier questionable, Dennis Smith questionable. If those guys are out, kind of like I think they personally, I think they will be. My current priority on this slate is the late night hammer mini stack of LeBron and LaMelo. If you were running less lineups, would that be kind of priority one for you as well?
I think it makes sense. Yeah. And there's a lot of late games. So if the news doesn't break your way, like you mentioned, you have some opportunity here to do some swapping around. For example, Sabonis has been really hooping lately too. And they have a 124 projected team total, which is, I guess, a little bit surprising to me, but it is what it is. So I think Sabonis is interesting if the news doesn't exactly break your way. And that's another thing. If Rozier and Smith miss, I mean, Rozier is, mostly the big one here, as Smith is kind of not really in the rotation right now. Although if just Rozier misses and Smith plays, we could have a different conversation there. But Kelly Oubre has been playing some fantastic basketball. I know there's a lot of mouths to feed now, but we're just going to have to wait until that good old 5:30 Eastern when we start getting a little bit of news, and then it'll be pretty chaotic for you fellas on Crunch Time tonight.
And another player in that set of 10 p.m. games that I think is going to be a priority for us is a 7-9 underpriced Chris Paul. Anytime you get a player that's cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DraftKings, I take note. And Chris Paul is one of those guys today, and he, I think, is going to be a staple in lineups going up against Memphis. And then that Sacramento game for tournaments that you were just talking about, Sabonis has been balling, but De'Aaron Fox at 8,600 is also a very nice price tag, coming in at sub 1% right now. If you're running lots of lineups, I think getting 5 to 10% De'Aaron Fox is a very interesting way to get different today. And you're looking at a Washington team that, we're talking about needing some Charlotte stuff to break our way. But if it doesn't, well, we got an $8,900 Bradley Beal, same price, different position, but same price, in a phenomenal matchup against Sacramento. If you happen to get Rozier ruled in and you don't want to play ball, you can probably do some swapping around there. Porzingis, Avdia, Delon Wright, all questionable for this one. If we get these guys all out, Brad Beal, Kyle Kuzma, Daniel Gafford, all look like phenomenal plays on this slate. So definitely some late stuff that we can keep our eye on. We talked about Jokic. I mean, that game's a 5-point spread with a high total. Memphis and Phoenix is a 3-point spread with a high total. Surprisingly, Luka's only favored by 7 points up against Houston, as Dallas is missing some ancillary players like Dorian Finney-Smith in this one. So weirdly enough, there's less blowout risk in that one than you would kind of think. But the next one I really want to focus on here is 8 p.m. New Orleans at OKC, 2-point spread, 115.75, 117.25. Just high total, close spread, exactly what you want to see. Fast-paced matchup. We loved CJ McCollum, but now he's questionable. Larry Nance, questionable. Jonas Valanciunas, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Najee Marshall are all projecting as phenomenal values already. If we get CJ McCollum out, Jose Alvarado and Dyson Daniels look like two of the very best values on the entire slate. And then from a tournament standpoint, it would make Devontae Graham interesting. And I think Willie Hernan-Gomez is already somewhat interesting for tournaments in this spot as well. And on the OKC side, we talked about an SGA as a potential tournament option, not very highly owned, coming in sub 10%. But you also have Jeremiah Robinson Earl out on the OKC side. This game is kind of stackable if you want to mix in some Pokashevsky, Jalen Williams, somebody like that as well.
I just want to make a point. Valanciunas was supposed to be the play of all play yesterday. Couldn't even hit his 16.5 points prop line for your boy here. Now, he picked up his 4th and then his 5th foul with 9:40 left in the fourth quarter. So he didn't really get his run. He only played 25 minutes. So, he
they
played
also
37.
were up like 25 points in the fourth quarter, so that had like a big factor to do with it as well.
They were, and then San Antonio cut it to about 8 or 9 at one point. But I think in a competitive game he'll see 30+ minutes. If McCollum's out. Like, if McCollum's out, sure, Valanciunas will garner even more ownership. But on this slate, I'm not so sure he'll even get the ownership that he deservedly should have. So I think Valanciunas is in a really interesting spot. Even if McCollum plays, if we see a competitive game here and he does see, 33, 34 minutes, he has 50+ point upside. So I'm really interested to seeing what unfolds here.
If he gets there, he's just without a doubt absolute smash. It's just the fact that he is picking up some ownership. $6,600 is not the mid 5K that he was, where the floor was even high enough if he didn't get enough minutes. But now up at that 6K price tag, if he's in the 25-minute range again, if Larry Nance is out, that increases his chance of hitting his minute ceiling. But just two bad teams, lots of injuries, and then the potential for Naz Reid, who would just be an absolute smash play. Although I guess we'll probably know Naz Reid before that one, since that game is at 7:30, since it's in Boston. So if you don't get Naz Reid, then I'm a lot more comfortable going with JV. But if I'm running a lot of lineups, I don't think I'd actually want to be that overweight. I think I'd want to be at the field. Or if I was overweight, I'd really make sure I was also overweight to Willy Hernangomez. Like, last night, he smashed in limited minutes. It was a blowout. JV was in foul trouble. Yes, it's a 1.5 point spread, but this is still two crappy teams based on who New Orleans is playing right now. Especially if CJ is out, we could see some chaos here. I think I'd want to make sure I'd get overweight on the Willy Hernangomez's and the Jackson Hayeses of the world as well. And then definitely Larry Nance as opposed to those two if he's playing today.
It's such a big slate, which throws a wrench into some things that I do normally. And the fact that we have a ton of chalk here on New Orleans and a lot of cheap chalk here with Marshall and Herbert Jones. Oklahoma City.
I want to say quick, Najee Marshall at 55% on a 14-game slate, and I can get Trey Murphy for 10. If that stands, like, I'm taking Trey Murphy over Herbert Jones and Najee Marshall 100 times out of 100. Like, if that is ownership projection staying right before lock, if I was running 150 lineups, I would probably full fade Marshall and Jones and then just get 70% Murphy. And make sure I get a ton of Alvarado and these other guys on their team as well, just because, like, these guys were in the same spot yesterday on a smaller slate, and, like, look what they did. Click Najee Marshall, and, like, yeah, he played some minutes and maybe lost some because it was a blow, but he had less than 20 fantasy points. Herbert Jones 5x'd, but it was with 2 steals and a block, and yeah, he'll probably do that again, but he needs that to hit value. And so I would just way rather go with Trey Murphy, a guy who can score, a guy who can rebound. I think in a vacuum, I prefer him over Herb Jones and Najee Marshall, ownership aside. And so when you include ownership here, I think it just drastically Murphy is the best play of those three, but it's still going to shift a ton because like we said, we got McCollum questionable. If he's out, we're going to get a ton more to the Jose Alvarados, Dyson Daniels, Devontae Grahams.
This kind of segues into the next quick conversation I wanted to have between Murphy. Let's say McCollum plays and the roster you're looking at on Lineup HQ is what you get. How many of these guys can you play together between Marshall, Herbert Jones, and Trey Murphy? Like, not all three of them are going to have ceiling games. I cannot see the three of them being optimal together in large field tournaments. I can't. Could you play 2 of them together? Maybe. But on such a big slate, I kind of just want to play one of them. A max of 1 build rule between those 3 guys. It's not like they're 3,500 or anything like that, TJ.
I don't think I'd want to play Najee and Murphy together just because it locks up both of those small forward positions. And even though I think I like the guard spot better, just being able to kind of differentiate that a little bit, go Herb at the shooting guard and one of those other two at the small forward, I don't mind that. But just based on those ownerships right now, it's looking like, yeah, like I'd be going, screw this. I'm fading Najee Marshall and Herbert Jones, and I'm just going to get 70% Trey Murphy today.
Yeah, and I usually like to correlate a lot of my lineups with run backs. Oklahoma City is such a poor team for run backs. I mean, you're probably thinking, what do you mean? They have SGA. I don't want all of my Pelicans exposure, especially these cheap guys, tied to SGA. These cheap guys can get there on their own. They're cheap enough where they could still get there in a blowout. They could also get there if SGA doesn't have his ceiling game. And the problem is with 14 games on the slate, TJ, is there's a million guys that have 70-point upside. I'm not totally sure it's going to be SGA. So I don't really want to tie these cheap Pelicans to SGA. However, I don't mind tying McCollum or Valanciunas to SGA because we know those guys would be the first ones to hit the bench if this doesn't play 4 quarters in a blowout.
That's what I was just going to say, is that, like, especially JV I think would be the one that I'd want to correlate with SGA the most. McCollum, just because, like, he can do what he did last night, right? And just go absolutely bonkers, be the reason for the blowout. You need JV to play 30 plus minutes to smash with this price tag. And so it has to be a close game. They need a big on the court. And that's the other thing that worries me today is, like, what if they just, like, like, even if we get Larry Nance out, I could see the Pelicans running a final lineup of McCollum, Alvarado, Najee Marshall, Trey Murphy, and Herb Jones, just running no center, because who's going to be out there for OKC? Who's going to close? Well, it's going to be SGA, Giddey, Dort, Jalen Williams, 4 guards right there. And then either Poku, Muscala, Kenrich Williams, like, not a center. And right. So I don't, like, that's what worries me about JV today is while he's going to smash while he's out there, I do worry that his minutes will get limited because he'll just be a defensive liability with the speed of this game. And so I would want to make a rule that if I'm playing SGA, I get at least, honestly, I'd say 2 Pelicans, but probably 3, unless those 2 are like JV and McCollum. If I'm spending that much price, then it's like I'm okay with those being the only 2. Right. But if I'm just value guys, I'd want it to be 3.
If you're newer to Lineup HQ, what I meant was by tying Jonas Valanciunas to somebody is setting that player as a conditional player. So whenever I have a Jonas Valanciunas share, I also have SGA in that same lineup, for example. You can do the same thing for exactly what TJ was talking about. So you can have free flowing SGA shares, but wherever you have a Valanciunas share, if you have 7 lineups with Valanciunas in it, you will also have SGA in those 7 lineups, but you may have SGA floating around in 5 more lineups in your build somewhere as well. So that's what that means. I know we spend a lot of time on that game, TJ, but this is a really pivotal game with all the value. Anywhere you want to go next?
Just things I kind of want to touch briefly on, because these are, again, more injury dependent. If we get Evan Mobley and Lamar Stevens out as well for Cleveland, Kevin Love, I think, is one of the best value plays on the slate. He'd be a priority for me. We talked about this Milwaukee-Brooklyn game. We love Giannis. If I was running 150, maybe I include Drew Holiday as well. Maybe Bobby Portis, Brook Lopez, but in single entry, even 10 entries, I don't think I'm getting to those guys. I don't mind Durant and Irving as a run back, but I don't think I'll get to anybody else on that team other than maybe a Royce O'Neal as a last piece in a mini stack. Trae Young and DeJounte Murray are both underpriced. I think both of them make for great value plays. Onyeka Okongwu is another center option if Clint Capella is going to be out. We do have Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson questionable for Minnesota. We're projecting them to play right now. Gobert played last game. Anderson didn't. If these guys are both out again, Naz Reid to me is the singular best play on the slate. $5,500 Naz Reid, I think, just is the best option. Where if both of those guys are out, we project him for let's see, how many minutes has he been getting in these past few games here when Gobert was out?
He played 40, he played 36.
Yeah, so like mid-30s, I think we could project him for. If we bump him up to just like say we're being pessimistic and we just go 34, he's projected as by far the best RG value on the slate with over 10. And that's without even accounting for taking Gobert and Anderson's rates off of the court. So Reed would be the best play on the slate if you happen to get that one out. Hopefully that's one of those ones you can get at like 7:01. Because if I'm running a singular lineup, I don't think I'm playing anybody in those 7 o'clock games. Yes, I like Embiid and Harden for tournaments. Yes, you can play Paul George in tournaments. And I even think Zubats is interesting for tournaments because, like, while foul trouble is likely, if he doesn't get in foul trouble, he's going to have to play big minutes against Embiid. And if he plays big minutes, he usually does well. So Zubats, I think, is very interesting for tournaments. I don't want to play anybody on San Antonio or Orlando. Yeah, it's a high total game. The spread's not that far, but everybody's healthy for both these teams, and they're kind of priced to a point where they're not all that necessary. And I think that kind of covers all the most important parts on the slate. The one thing I want to ask you before you get out of here, kind of like from an expert survey standpoint kind of thing, who would be your number one, but less cash? I'm not as worried about that because means he's going to be covering that for crunch time, right? People are coming here for tournaments for the most part. In a single entry tournament, you're paying, who is your priority stud to pay up for? One.
Single entry, it's going to be LeBron in that matchup. We kind of hinted at it earlier. I'm staring at Anthony Edwards, not to like add on to your last question, but they missed Kyle Anderson for a couple of games. They missed Rudy Gobert for a couple of games. There's been a real spike in Anthony Edwards' peripheral numbers. And, he had that Dallas matchup too, which was really slow and good defensive team. And you don't typically like to target a ton of guys against Dallas, but, Boston, you think it's the same thing, right? Super slow, even better defensive. Marcus Smart was upgraded to probable earlier today, but I don't mind pairing Anthony Edwards with wherever my Boston shares are. And kind of, if I have Edwards in my pool, it's going to be someone with Boston because clearly, like, he's been contributing in other places more than just putting the ball in the bucket, which is what he's known for. But single entry stud, for me, it's LeBron. I'm going to try to be the most overweight on Luka and hope he goes for that 70 bomb against Houston.
And then, as you still just got Anthony Edwards up on this screen here, showing off how much you love to play. I agree. LeBron's my number one spend up. In terms of Boston specifically, playing on FanDuel today, FanDuel Friday, Jaylen Brown is a great value. Like we talked about, it's rare you get someone who's cheaper on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings at this price tag. And Brown is $700 cheaper. He makes for a great play on FanDuel, not so much on DK. Whereas Jason Tatum, if you're wanting to play him today, I do recommend shopping elsewhere because while he is going to be super low owned due to his price on FanDuel, 11.2 is a hefty price tag, and there are higher upside studs you can get. Joel Embiid, Luka Doncic, Giannis, Jokic, if you're paying all the way up, Durant, SGA, Siakam, Sabonis, if you're not going quite that high. I think you just fade Tatum's price tag on FanDuel today. Now you're running 150, running 150 lineups today. Who is the one stud you would make sure you get the most overweight on the field to, and how much would you be trying to get?
I just said that it was going to be Luka. Listen, Jokic has what? 370 plus point games in his last 5 games without looking. So I can't fault you for Jokic. He's just center only. I definitely want to get twice the field on all these guys up top. I know some of these mid-range price guys are really attractive on this slate, but I think Luka's matchup is fantastic. It's a close second with Giannis for me. I know he's even more expensive than Luka, but that being said, like if this Brooklyn Milwaukee game is close and Giannis is fresh off a 70 burger against Cleveland, I think it's Luka and Giannis for me.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Those would be the two I'd prioritize as well. Not that I don't love Jokic, it's just there's a lot of other center plays today that I want to get to. Especially if we end up getting some guys ruled out, and then I get to more Naz Reid, Onyeka, Kongwu, stuff like that. So Jokic, while I love him, and I'd probably be close to even on that 7%, and I'd definitely be at least 10, but probably closer to 20% Giannis and Luka today. While also trying to get maybe even to the 10% on SGA. Definitely over 5% or 2% Embiid, definitely over 2% Kevin Durant, definitely over 2% Pascal Siakam. Those are all guys I would be bare minimum trying to double if I was running 150. But staying in the singular entry realm like I am today, outside of LeBron, I'm going to be prioritizing the mid-tier studs, probably looking towards McCollum, LaMelo Ball, and Chris Paul. And because of that, like that's why like the specific stud I'd prioritize would depend a lot on how that news shakes out. If Rozier's out, McCollum is in. Well, I want to get a ton of ball in McCollum, and so Luka would be tougher to get to. And because of that, I'd try and get to a lot more Giannis. And obviously LeBron, who I naturally will have a lot of. I talked about liking a lot of centers, a lot of guards. So because of that, Giannis would probably be the one stud I'd be getting the most overweight on. Single entry tournament, not necessarily worrying about chalk. You're paying up for LeBron. You need to find some salary. Who is your primary salary saver today in a single entry?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I can sort by RG value here, and I think one of these Pelicans are going to be optimal. I'd be surprised if they weren't. I don't know. However you want to set your build rules too. I love your idea of going overweight on Trey Murphy. I'm at the point where honestly maybe I set a build rule, a max of 1 between Marshall and Herbert Jones. They project pretty similarly. They're both chalky. I know we talked about the whole small forward thing, and we have kind of similar ideas here. But what the odds are both optimal on a 14 gamer here in large field tournaments. I have no problem playing them together in small field stuff, but I am going to be a cop out and say that is Najee Marshall.
And I think if you're doing that too, you maybe leave 1 or 2 teams for you to hand build where you're throwing in SGA and 4 New Orleans Pelicans, and including Herbert Jones and Najee Marshall together, just kind of doing the full stack just in case this one goes absolutely bonkers since those guys are so cheap. For me, it's Troy Brown. Not Troy Murphy. It's Troy Murphy by far. Just with Najee Marshall and Herbert Jones being such chalk, to me, that's the easiest, best straight line pivot you could do. And then obviously, if we get Rudy Gobert rolled out, it is going to be Naz Reid for me by a very large margin. Is there anybody that caught your eye from a salary saving standpoint that's not picking up much ownership today? That's nice and cheap. We kind of glossed over this team. We didn't really talk about them. But for me, somebody I'm looking to in tournaments today, one of my favorite values, depending on how like this slate shakes out if we don't get much more. But we have Javonte Green and Alex Caruso out. Goran Dragic was questionable. So who knows how much he's really going to get in here. I do think it is very interesting to get to some Kobe White in tournaments today. He's getting 7% ownership, projecting for 26.5 minutes. But if we look at his recent game log here, 29 minutes last game, 23 minutes the game before. Last game, the 29 was when Caruso left mid-game. I think we could get closer to 30 minutes here for Kobe White, and he's obviously the kind of guy that if he gets hot, he can break a slate.
Guys on the screen here, Tim Hardaway. I know it's not super cheap. Coming in at a modest projected ownership here. You said they're down some sidecar players here. Listen, anybody could go off against Houston. The pace, the minimal resistance defensively. Tim Hardaway likes to chuck if he gets hot. I think Hardaway is super interesting for tournaments.
Yeah, I think he is as well. Going to pick up a little bit of ownership, but I do think it is rightfully so. And I mean, we are not at all worried about 15% on a 14-game slate. You're typically not worried about ownership at all on a 14-game slate. It's just when we see some glaring ones like Najee Marshall and Herb Jones, that's when you start wanting to make a lot of pivots, but who knows? We'll give you some updates before lock with the Crunch Time crew, myself, joined by Andy Means, handling cash, the cash game master, as well as our guy, Drizzy, Andre Alford, handling tournaments today. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, hit the like button. I feel like we delivered you a pretty nice show today, capped it at just over 30 minutes here. Got the Grinders Live crew coming, followed by the Crunch Time crew. So we got lots of great content today. Make sure you hit the like button on behalf of myself and Luuch and our amazing production crew. Not sure who we're sending this to after. It's going to be Steve or Devin or somebody, but they're both great. So shout out to both of them. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. Thanks for FanDuel for sponsoring the show, and we will see you next week. Peace.